Sachas Megillah Daf Chav Ches contains one Mishnah about halfway through. The first half of the Daf continues the Gemara's list of Talmidei Chachamim and their practice, which merited them a long life. The Mishnah will introduce the topic of kavod for a shul, specifically a shul that's no longer functioning. The Gemara will talk about taking care of the dead and the practices of funerals, how you say hispedim. The Gemara will also mention kavod of Talmidei Chachamim there. So let's begin with the last line in Daf Chav Zayin. The Gemara says that the Talmidei Master prayed, how did you merit a long life? He said, I did a few things. No one ever came to the base measure before me. I was the first one there. I never said Berachas Hamazon in place of a Kohen. In the days of Chazal, that is, there was only one person who said Berachas Hamazon for everyone at the table. Just like today we have someone who leads. That honor should go to the Kohen. So Rav Preda says he never took it if there was a Kohen there. And the last thing he says is, I never ate from an animal that did not have its matnas kahuna, its gifts to Kohanim, removed from it. That is the zero, the keva, and the lechayayim. It should be taken off. Now that's not technically aser. The Gemara says that Rav Yitzchak says the name of Rav Yochanan that it's aser, and that it's like truma, just like you shouldn't eat grain or fruit until you've taken off its truma and its meiser. You shouldn't eat from an animal until you've removed those matnas kahuna. The Gemara says the halacha is not like that. It is not aser. However, Rav Preda was machmer on that anyway. So now the Gemara says, but you said that he gave berachas hamazon to a Kohen. The Gemara says that you shouldn't have done that. Why is that a good thing to do? We have a quote of Rav Yochanan who says that a Talmud Chacham should not allow anybody to bench before him, instead of him, in place of him. Even if he's the Kohen Gadol, but if he's an Am Haaretz, he should not bench in the presence of a Talmud Chacham. And if he does, he's Chayiv Misa, because the Torah says, Kol Misanai Ahavu Maves, all those who hate me love death. And the Gemara says you should read that as Masni'ai, those who cause people to hate me. So if you allow an Am Haaretz to lead Berachas Hamazon in place of a Talmud Chacham, it makes people degrade the status of Talmidei Chachamim, and then they'll degrade Torah in general. So Gemara says, no, he only allowed a Kohen to bench in front of him when they were of equal stature, not when he was a Talmud Chacham greater, or the other one was an Am Haaretz. Okay, next thing Gemara says, the Talmidei Master from Nechuni ben Akana, and what did you merit long life? So he said, I never took honor at the downfall of my friends, of others, and I never went to sleep with the curse of a friend upon me. And I always gave up on my monetary rights. So Gemara explains, I never honored myself with the downfall of my friend, like Rav Huna, who was carrying a shovel on his shoulder, and Rav Chana bar Chanilai came and wanted to carry the shovel for him. So he said, look, if in your hometown you carry shovels, then you can carry it for me, because it's not a disgrace for you. If, however, in your hometown you would never carry a shovel, because it would be disgraceful for you to carry a shovel, then I'm not going to have my honor precede yours and have you be disgraced by carrying the shovel just because it's disgraceful for me to carry the shovel. I'm not going to honor myself at your expense. Now, not going to sleep with the curse of another upon you. Where it says that means you should always forgive everyone before you go to bed. Like Mar Zutra, whenever he went into his bed for the night, he would sit and he would say, I forgive everyone who started up with us today. And as far as giving up with your money, so he always gave a little bit more than he needed to. So Gemara says it was like Eov always used to let a storekeeper keep the change, didn't need every exact penny that he was supposed to have rights to. Okay, now the Gemara says Rav Akiva asked Rabbi Nechunya Hagadol, in what merit did you get a long life? So the servants of Rabbi Nechunya got upset because they thought that Rabbi Akiva was trying to say, why are you living so long? It's time for you to die. So they started to hit him. So he ran away and he climbed up a tall palm tree to hide from them. And he called out to Rabbi Nechunya, why does the Torah say, the one lamb? If he does say the lamb, and I know it's only one, why do you have to say one? So when Nechuni heard the kasha, so he said, okay, he's a Talmud Chacham, leave him alone. And he answered, and he said, Echad here refers to Miyuchad, the unique one, the special one. So then he answered him, and he said that the merit of my long life was that I never accepted gifts from anyone, I never stood for my rights, and I wasn't makbid, I was mavater on my monetary rights. The Gemara explains, I never took a gift from anyone like Rabbi Elazar. Whenever anyone would send him a gift from the house of the Nesiim were the rulers in charge, he would not accept it. When they invited him, he would not go. He would say, what do you want? You don't want me to live? Don't you know that the Torah says in Mishlei, Sonam Atanas Yecheh, one who hates gifts will live, and therefore I don't want to accept any gifts because I would like to live. Now the Gemara notes that Rabbi Zera had a somewhat similar practice. He would not accept gifts from the Nesiim, from the Beit Nesiah, but he would go if he was invited. And he would say, if they're inviting me, it's not because they're giving me a gift of a meal, because they're asking me to honor them with my presence. It's an honor that I'm giving to them by attending. Now, about Mavral Midosov, we said where you do not demand your rights. So Rava said, anybody who's Mavral Midosov, anybody who contains his rights, he doesn't stick up for himself for every little thing. So somebody like that will have his sins removed from him, like it says, Nosi Avon over al Pesha. Hashem bears sin and forgives Averos. For who does Hashem bear sin? Who does he remove his sin? For somebody who forgives Averos. Somebody who says, okay, I'll let it go. I won't take revenge on every single thing. Okay, now the Gemara says that Rebbe asked Rabbi Ben Karcha, what was your merit for a long life? So I said, what, you're disgusted with my life? You don't want me to die? You don't want me to live anymore? You want me to die? So he said, no, Rebbe, it's Torah, and I want to learn it, because maybe there's something that is there that I will be able to keep, I'll be able to fulfill. So he said like this, I never looked at the form of a wicked person, I never looked at a rasha. So Rav Yochanan says it's forbidden to look at a rasha. As a support for this, he quotes the pasuk in Sefer Malachim, where Elisha Hanavi is speaking to Yehoram, the king who was a rasha, and he said, "V'yomer Elisha Chai Hashem tzvakas asher amati lefonav kilulei pnei Yoshafat melech Yehuda ani nosei im abed elacha v'im ereka." If not for the fact that I was representing Yoshafat, I would not look at you, and the reason is because he was wicked. So, therefore, you shouldn't look at the face of a rasha. So the Gemara brings other sources for that. The Gemara says, Rav Elazar says that somebody who looks at a wicked person will lose the strength of his eyesight, and that's why Yitzchak was blind, because he looked at Esav. Like it says, V'hiki zaken Yitzchak v'atachena einav me'ra'os. When Yitzchak got old, his eyes were too weak to see. That was because he saw Esav. The Gemara asks, we learn that there's a different reason for that. We learn that it's because of the curse of Avimelech to Sarah, because Avimelech said to Sarah, Hine lecha ksus einayim, which we understand to mean Hine lecha ksiyas einayim, it's covering your eyes. So he cursed Sarah with blindness, and that's what affected Yitzchak. Gemara says no, it was caused by both of them. The two together are what caused, it was the curse of Avimelech, but it was through the looking at Esav. Rabbi gives another source. This Se'es Pnei Rasha Lo Toiv. The Gemara translates Se'es as looking at, beholding. So to behold the face of a rasha is not good. Now, at the time that Rebbe was leaving, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, he said, give me a bracha, please. So he said, you should live half as long as me. So he said, that's it? He said, well, if you live longer than that, then your children will never get a chance to be Nesiim after you. And the expression that he used was, do you want those who come after you to graze the grass? You're not going to leave anything for them if you live as long as I did. Now, on the subject, the Gemara says that Avua bar Ihi and Minyamin bar Ihi, one says I get Schar Olam Haba because I never looked at a Kusi. The other one says I get Schar Olam Haba because I never made a partnership with a Kusi. Okay, last one, the Talmid Master of Zera. What was the merit for your long life? So he said, I was never makbid in my house. I never showed anger in my house. I never walked in front of somebody who was greater than me. I did not think words of Torah in the filthy alleyways where there's waste matter. I also, despite that, never walked 4 amos without thinking in Torah or wearing tefillin. I never slept in a beis medrash, not temporary and not even a nap. And I never was happy at the downfall of my friend. I never called a friend by a nickname or by a last name, by a family name. I always used his personal given name in full. Okay, now we get to the next Mishnah. So the Mishnah discusses what happens when you have a shul which is no longer functioning. So Rav Yehuda says you're not allowed to do a hesped in it. You're not allowed to do work in it. Specifically, you're not allowed to braid ropes. Ropes need a large area, Rashi explains, and therefore you might be tempted to do that in a shul. You should not weave nets. You can't spread fruits on the roof. You can't use it as a shortcut. In short, all the halachas of a shul still apply to a shul which isn't functioning anymore. It says the Gemara that this is derived from the pasuk that says, I will destroy your holy places, and even though they're destroyed, they still have the kedusha of a shul. Now the Mishnah ends off and says that if grass grows, if you get weeds growing in the shul, you should leave it there so that people will be distressed and be mispalel for the shul to be rebuilt. The Gemara begins with a brisa that also discusses the halachos of shuls. So it says, first of all, shuls, we're talking about functioning shuls at first. So it says you cannot do lightheaded things in there. For example, you cannot eat and drink in a shul. The Gemara will say there's exceptions to this, but you can't eat or drink in a shul. You should not pretty yourself up in a shul. You should not go strolling around shul. You should not use it as protection from the sun or from the rain. You shouldn't go in there for shelter. You should not use it for a hesped. You shouldn't use it as a gathering area to, say, a funeral. That's only for a funeral of an individual. But if it's a funeral of a Talmid Chacham where you need room for a big crowd, that you are allowed to. But you are allowed to learn there. You could learn Chumash. You could learn Mishnayos. You could say a hesped for large groups. Now the Brisa says Rav Yehuda adds something here, and the Gemara is going to have trouble fitting it in because his comment doesn't seem to fit on what we said before. So the Gemara adds in that the Brisa now should say that the care of the shul should be as follows. You should sweep it, and you should sprinkle water on the floor so that it doesn't grow weeds. Now that Rav Yehuda says, what is that true? That's only true about a shul that's functioning. A shul that is no longer in use, you should leave it. You shouldn't take care of it in that sense, so that it should grow weeds in order that people should be distressed, and then they'll be able to be mispala, and maybe it'll be able to go back to being in use again. You shouldn't also pull the weeds out once they grow, he says. Says the Gemara, Rav Asi says, shuls that are built in Vavel, that's outside Eretz Yisrael, are all built with a condition. They are built on the condition that should something happen, you're allowed to use it for something else. You're allowed to do other things in the shul. We built it, we started to use it on Tanai that it shouldn't have all these restrictions. So, even though that's true, you still can't do lightheaded things in there, which the Gemara defines as calculations. You shouldn't calculate things in a shul. You shouldn't sit there and do your taxes, whatever it is. Now, the Gemara quotes Rav Asi also says that any shul which they do cheshbonos, you should fill it up with the bodies of the dead people. Gemara says that's what you should do. You should fill it up with bodies of dead people. You can't leave it. So Gemara says no. We mean to say that in the end you're going to fill it up with a mace mitzvah because you're going to have people that die, and you won't know whose they are. Or you won't know what to do with them. You're going to end up having to put them in the shul. Now we had other things in the Mishnah. You shouldn't beautify yourself in the shul. You shouldn't use it to take care of your personal needs. The Gemara says that Talmidei Chachamim are allowed to. This shul is called Vei Rabbanon, the house of the Talmidei Chachamim. Since they pretty much live there, they're allowed to do things there that others are not, because it's almost like their house. They're not allowed to shelter there because of the sun and the rain. So Gemara says it was an incident that happened with Ravina and Ravada Bar Masa that were talking and learning with Rava, and it started to pour, so they went into the shul. And he said, we're not coming in here in order to hide from the rain, we're coming in here because we're learning, and you can't learn with the rain pounding on your head, so this is part of learning. We need it in order to have clear heads, because you can't learn unless you're clear-headed like a day with a strong north wind. Therefore, we need to be in the shul. But if not that we were learning, we wouldn't walk into the shul because of the rain. Okay, now the Gemara says, what should a person do if he needs to call somebody out of shul? He's not allowed to walk into shul without learning there. He's not allowed to just go into shul. You have to do something there that's befitting. So the Gemara says, if he's a Talmid Chacham, we should say halacha. If he's not that much of a Talmid Chacham, but he knows Mishnayos, he should say a Mishnah. If not, he should say a pasuk if he knows Psukim. If he doesn't know any of that, he should call a child and say, tell me what pasuk you learned today. Can't do any of these things, he should at least go sit down in the shul, spend some time there. That itself is a mitzvah, and then he can go and leave. Alright, now on the topic of hespedim, of eulogies, so the Gemara had said, the Mishnah had said, you're only allowed to do a hesped shel rabim, a large-scale eulogy. We want to know, like what? What's an example of that? So the Gemara says, Rav Chizda pointed at Rav Sheshes pointed at Rav Chizda. They each wanted to say, any hesped that he says is going to attract a lot of people to come, so that would be an example of a hesped of rabim. The Gemara says that Rafram did a hesped for his daughter-in-law in shul. He said that people will come for her honor and for my honor together. You'll end up with a big crowd, and therefore it's befitting to use a shul. The Gemara says that Rabbi Zera said a hesped for a Talmud Chacham in shul. And he said either one would be enough, either for my honor saying the hesped or for the honor of the person who was nifter. You're going to have a big crowd here, and therefore it's befitting to happen in shul. Now the Gemara compares two different hespedim. Rish Lakish said a hesped on a unknown Talmud Chacham from Eretz Yisrael who used to teach 24 rows of Talmidim. So he said, Eretz Yisrael lost a great man. He was fervent in his eulogy even though he didn't know the person. The Gemara says that was different than Rav Nachman, who was asked to say a hesped on someone who knew Sifra, Sifri, and Tosefta. And Rav Nachman said, what should I say? He was a basket full of Sfarim, because he had all these Sfarim in his head. I don't know that he knew any of them. He knew to learn and to explain and understand each of them. He was able to say them over, so that's like he's a book. So Gemara says, look at the difference between the powerful ones of Eretz Yisrael, like Rish Lakish, who was willing to say a hesped for someone who didn't know, and the Hasidim of Bavel, meaning even though the powerful ones would theoretically be haughty, but still Rish Lakish acted humbly, and the pious ones, like Rav Nachman, who was called one of the tzaddikim from Bavel, still he was unwilling to say a hesped for someone in a situation like that. The Gemara quotes a Mishnah that talks about the kavod of Talmidei Chachamim. It says, Dishtamish b'taga cholaf, somebody who uses the crown of Torah, that is somebody who makes use of Talmidei Chachamim, he will pass from the world. Rish Lakish says that somebody who uses someone who learns Torah. Ula says it's better to use somebody who learned Torah than to use somebody who teaches Torah. Not necessarily arguing with Rish Lakish, but just giving an order of priority. The Gemara has an incident. Rish Lakish was walking along the way and he came to a body of water he couldn't cross, and somebody picked him up, carried him on his shoulder, and started carrying him across. So while he's being carried across, Rish Lakish said, did you learn Psukim? He said, yes, I learned Psukim. He said, did you learn Mishnayos? He said, I learned 4 Siddharim. So he said, you carved out for yourself 4 big rocks, and you're carrying Bar Lakish on your shoulder, put Bar Lakish into water. So he said, I would rather serve you. It's good for me to serve you. So he said, if you want to serve me, so I'll teach you something. That will be how you'll serve me. And Rav Zera said, the halacha is that today, Benos Yisrael, Jewish women, sit and wait 7 clean days after seeing even just 1 drop of menstrual blood. That is, normally in previous times, the halacha was that that's only true if they had 3 days in a row where they saw blood during the time of Ziva. But today, we don't know which times we are, Ziva or Nida, and we don't know if we missed a few drops, and therefore any drop of blood causes a requirement for 7 clean days. The Gemara adds a brayso here, Tanan Debei Elio, famous brayso which we've seen many times. Somebody who learns halachos is promised to be a ben olam haba, like it says halichos olam lo, and we say a Jewish, we call it halachos olam lo.